The conference room froze the moment my mother reached for the pen with my name on it. "It's fine," she told the attorney, her voice smooth and practiced. "I handle everything for the family. I'll sign for Lena." Not a pause, not a question. A statement. The attorney's hand stopped halfway to the folder. Across the polished mahogany table, the senior partner's gaze flicked from the blue ink pen to my mother's manicured fingers, then to me. "Mrs. Cole," he said carefully, "your daughter is 32. Legally, she signs for herself." My mother's smile tightened by a millimeter. "Of course," she said, in the tone she used when a waiter misunderstood her order. "I just mean she always lets me handle this stuff. Don't you, sweetheart?" Every head turned. My father cleared his throat beside her, shifting in his leather chair. My brother Ethan stopped scrolling his phone long enough to glance up, expression caught between boredom and impatience. My younger sister Molly looked from Mom to me like she was watching a familiar scene play out on an old TV rerun. The folder in front of me was thick: trust documents, durable powers of attorney, healthcare proxies, guardianship clauses. The estate my grandmother had spent 40 years building, laid out in neat, tabbed piles with my name on almost every page. My legal authority, my responsibility, not my mother's. I slid my hands into my lap for a second, palms pressed together until I felt the faint sting of my nails against my skin. On the table, my name appeared over and over in calm, printed font. ELENA MARIS Cole Primary Trustee. ELENA MARIS Cole Agent. ELENA MARIS Cole Sole Beneficiary. They thought this was a formality, that I'd show up, not obediently, and let Mom run the show like she always had. A nice, neat ceremony before they took control of my grandmother's house, her savings, her life. They had no idea I'd quietly rewritten the script months ago. I picked up the pen. "I'll sign for myself," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It slid into the room with a calmness that didn't feel like mine until I heard it from outside myself. My mother's eyes narrowed, just a flicker. "Lena, we talked about this," she said softly, teeth still showing in that social smile. "Grandma needs us to coordinate. You know how complicated all this legal stuff is. You're not comfortable with it." That was the story she'd always told, the story everyone believed. That paperwork was too big, too serious, too confusing for me, that I was better off letting her handle things. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was how many nights I'd spent alone at my kitchen table, laptop open, reading statutes and consumer rights articles until the words blurred. How many hours I'd sat on hold with credit bureaus, banks, and legal aid centers cleaning up damage she'd already done in my name. The senior partner cleared his throat. "Just to be absolutely clear," he said, looking at me now, only at me. "Miss Cole, you understand that as executor and trustee, the decisions here are yours alone. You're not required to share authority with anyone. That was your grandmother's explicit instruction." My mother's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me." I uncapped the pen. The click echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. "I understand," I said. The air shifted, a subtle tilt, like when an elevator stops and your body catches up a second too late. For years, I had lived inside the space between my mother's decisions and my own silence. Today, that space had paperwork. Statutes, notarized signatures. Proof. They thought this meeting would cement what they'd always assumed, that I was an extension of them, an extra hand, a convenient name. They didn't realize it was the moment they'd learn the truth. I wasn't here to sign over control. I was here because they had already taught me exactly how dangerous it was to let someone else sign for you. I didn't grow up afraid of signatures. I grew up afraid of the envelopes that came after them. White ones with windows, thick cream ones from banks, thin, sour-smelling ones from collection agencies with my name printed wrong but close enough to stick. They lined the kitchen counter in our house in San Antonio like a second set of appliances, always there, humming quietly in the background. "You don't need to worry about that, Lena," Mom would say, brushing past me to snatch them up. "Grown-up stuff." Then she'd sit at the table with a glass of wine and a pen that never seemed to run out of ink. Ethan's cleats were by the back door, still streaked with mud from whatever game he'd scored the winning goal in that week. Molly's sheet music lay scattered across the coffee table, highlighter marks in pink and yellow. Their trophies and ribbons took up entire shelves in the hallway. My achievements lived in file folders. spelling bee certificates, honor roll lists. The perfect attendance pin I'd almost been proud of. Of course you have perfect attendance, Mom had laughed when I showed her. What else do you have going on? I learned early that noise meant importance. Ethan's games were screaming crowds, team dinners, long car rides. Molly's recitals were programs printed in thick paper, bouquets of flowers, family photos in the lobby. My world was quieter. Homework done alone. Books checked out from the library. Late nights at the dining table, trying to make sense of algebra while the TV blared in the next room. The first time paperwork touched my life directly, I was 16. We were at the cell phone store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and too bright. Ethan was complaining about his cracked screen. Molly wanted the newest model all her friends had. Mom smiled at the salesman, leaning on the counter like it was a bar. "We'll put this one under her name," Mom said, jerking her chin toward me. "She's very responsible." I thought it was a compliment. At the time, I felt something almost like pride. Responsible. The salesman handed me a form. The print was small. The monthly total looked manageable. Mom pointed where to sign without really looking. "It'll help build your credit," she said. I signed. 2 years later, a collections notice arrived at my dorm. Past due final notice. The amount due was triple what I remembered. Lines of fees and penalties marched down the page. The phone number I called led to a recorded voice that treated me like I was both invisible and at fault. Mom shrugged when I asked. "Oh, that," she said. "We switched carriers. I thought it was under our plan. They must have messed up the billing. Don't worry, they always send scary letters. I'll sort it out." She didn't. I did. On a rainy Tuesday between classes, I skipped lunch and spent an hour on hold, my ear pressed to a borrowed phone, listening to the same synthesized music repeat. When a human voice finally answered, they didn't care about the misunderstanding. They cared about the balance. My balance. By then, Ethan had a car in his name that Dad helped co-sign. Molly had a private instructor for voice lessons and a music fund account. I had a damaged credit score and a new understanding. Responsibility wasn't a compliment. It was a resource, something they could spend. That fall, I started reading everything I signed. Every waiver, every form. I'd stand in lines that stretched out the registrar's office door, scanning paragraphs while people behind me sighed. "Hurry up," Mom texted once, when I messaged her a photo of a financial aid consent. "You worry too much." Maybe I did, but the worry was the only thing that ever stood between my name and their decisions. By the time I turned 22, I could fill out financial aid documents in my sleep. I knew which checkbox meant they could talk to my parents and which kept my file private. I knew the difference between a primary account holder and an authorized user, between a co-signer and a guarantor. I knew how quickly a life could be signed away while you stood in the doorway, too young to understand. The worst signature I ever gave them didn't look dangerous at all. I was 19 and home for winter break, the house full of the strange, sour warmth of reheated leftovers and fake pine candle. Ethan had brought his new girlfriend. Molly played Christmas music too loudly from her room, singing along. Mom cornered me by the pantry with a manila envelope. "Just a small favor," she said, already uncapping her pen. "You know your dad's construction business has been a little complicated." Complicated meant the same thing it always had: late invoices, bounced checks, the constant hum of "we're figuring it out" that vibrated through our house like neon. "It's just a refinancing thing," she said. "The bank needs one more signature to push it through, and your credit is so clean, honey. It'll help the interest rate. We'll take care of all the payments. You won't even notice." The papers looked official, weighty. The numbers meant nothing to me at first glance. I was a sophomore juggling organic chemistry and part-time tutoring. The last thing I wanted was to spend vacation reading loan terms. "And if I don't?" I asked. She smiled, that practiced, wounded smile. "Of course you can say no. We just thought, after everything we do, you might want to help out a little." I thought about rides to school, dinners paid for with cards I never saw the statements for. I thought about the way Dad's shoulders had slumped lately when he thought no one was looking. I signed. 3 years later, a letter arrived at my tiny off-campus apartment in Denton. I'd just gotten home from my shift at the lab, fingers still faintly smelling of latex gloves and ethanol. The return address belonged to a bank I didn't recognize. Inside was a statement, 18 months of missed payments, and a number that made my knees go soft. I wasn't a backup signature on some refinancing. I was the primary cosigner on a second mortgage I'd never set foot in the bank to discuss. When I called my mother breath shallow, she sounded tired. "Oh, for God's sake, Lena, calm down. The business hit a rough patch. Your father is working on a deal. The bank can wait." "My credit can't," I said, my voice shook. "They said if this goes to collections, I won't qualify for any reasonable loans for years." "So you'll rent a little longer," she snapped. "You academics always want everything perfect. We didn't have anyone rescuing us at your age." Rescuing? As if they were the ones drowning. I hung up shaking, not from anger yet, but from something colder. The realization that their emergencies would always arrive in my name and the cleanup would always happen in my spare time. The next day, I walked into the campus legal aid clinic with the statement crumpled in my bag. The attorney, a woman with tired eyes and kind hands, listened without interrupting as I unfolded 3 years of small favors and grown-up stuff. When I finished, she sat back. "You understand what happened here, right?" she asked gently. "I signed," I said. She shook her head. "They used your information to secure debts they knew they couldn't carry. That's not help, that's exploitation." The word felt heavy in my mouth. Exploitation? She walked me through options: debt consolidation, credit repair, potential fraud claims if I could prove misrepresentation. None of it was quick or clean. All of it required something my family never thought I'd have: patience, persistence, documentation. I started a binder that night: plastic sleeves, tabs, every notice, every letter, every copy of anything with my name on it. In the front, I slid a single piece of notebook paper with 3 words written in my tight, small handwriting: "Never sign blind." By 25, I had negotiated away most of the damage, one phone call and certified letter at a time. My credit was bruised but breathing. I knew the internal routing numbers of 3 banks by heart. I knew exactly how long it took for a "we'll handle it" promise to turn into a collection notice. I also knew this: my family's crises would never end, but my ability to be their silent collateral could. I just didn't know yet what that would look like, or how far I'd eventually go to make sure they never wrote my name on their problems again. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late September, just as the first cold front slid over Dallas and turned the air thin and sharp. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Mom lit up the screen, followed by a second call from ETHAN before the first even finished ringing. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old habit, new boundary. But something in the double call made my thumb move. "Hey," I said. "We're at the hospital," Mom said without hello. Her voice was tight, clipped. "Your father had a minor stroke. They say it's transient. You need to get here." For a moment, the world narrowed to the drip of coffee from the machine and the faint hum of my refrigerator. I grabbed my keys. "I'm on my way," I said, because whatever else was true, he was still my father. The man who taught me to drive in an empty grocery store parking lot, who sat silently in the stands at my 8th grade science fair, the only time he'd shown up unexpectedly. Baptist Medical smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Ethan was pacing the waiting room when I arrived, his face pale under his tan. Mom sat in a chair, makeup perfect, eyes red. "He's stable," Ethan said quickly. "They just need to run tests. There's some paperwork stuff." Of course there was. We were ushered into a small side office off the ward, where a social worker waited with a clipboard and soft eyes. On the desk, a stack of forms lay like a quiet accusation. "Given your husband's medical condition," she said gently, "it's important we establish who has legal authority if there are complications down the line. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, that sort of thing." Mom straightened, reaching automatically for the pen. "That'll be me," she said. The social worker hesitated. "We don't have any existing directives on file," she said, "so we'll need to set them up today. It's often helpful to appoint a secondary agent as well. Another adult child, for example." Her gaze slid to me. Mom followed it. "We'll put Lena down," she said. "She's always around. Ethan's got the business and the kids. Molly's busy with her audition schedule." Something in me bristled. "Can I see the forms?" I asked. Mom's eyes flashed. "Not now, Lena. We don't have time for one of your reviews. Just sign where they tell you." The social worker pushed the pages toward me anyway. I scanned them, the language familiar at this point. Durable power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, financial authority in the event of incapacity. My name appeared twice, neatly typed under my father's. Attorney in fact, Elena M. Cole. Do I have to decide right now? I asked, looking up. The sooner the better, the social worker said gently. It's always less complicated if we set it up while he's stable. Mom exhaled sharply. For God's sake, Lena, this isn't like last time. This is your father. You owe him this. I thought about the second mortgage that still ghosted my credit reports. The cell phone account I'd never opened but had paid off anyway. The nights I'd eaten canned soup so I could afford certified mail receipts. I also thought about the way my father's hand had squeezed mine when I peeked into his room 20 minutes earlier. The tired smile he'd tried to muster. The soft, slurred, "Hey, kiddo." "I'll think about it," I said. Mom stared at me as if I'd spoken in another language. "We don't have time." "We do," I said quietly. "You're his wife. You can sign yours now. I'll review mine and get them back to you this week." On the drive home, the hospital's exit signs blurred into lines of green. I pulled into my apartment complex with my jaw clenched so tight my head ached. The forms lay on the passenger seat like a dare. I carried them upstairs carefully, set them on the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I typed each title into the search bar, drilling past the surface explanations into statute pages and case summaries. I read about families torn apart by unchecked authority, about bank accounts drained for convenience, about adult children left holding debts their parents had quietly accumulated under shared signatures. Somewhere between the third legal article and a forum story about a daughter whose siblings emptied their mother's savings in the name of helping. A cold, clear thought settled into place. If I signed these forms without protection, I was handing them a key with my name carved into the handle. And my family had never met a door they didn't walk through as if they owned the house. I closed my laptop, the lines of text still burning behind my eyes. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached for my phone, not to call my mother, but to dial a number from the business card the legal aid attorney had pressed into my hand years earlier. "Dallas Elder Law and Estate Clinic," a voice answered. "How can we help you?" I looked at the forms. "I need to know," I said, "how to protect someone I care about without letting my family use my name to destroy us both." It was the first step in a process that would do more than safeguard my father. It would make sure that, someday, when they tried to sign on my behalf again, the ink wouldn't take it all. The elder law attorney's office sat on the fourth floor of a low, beige building tucked between a dental practice and a tax prep service. One of those places you drive by 100 times without noticing. Inside, it smelled faintly of paper and lemon disinfectant. The waiting room was quiet, save for the ticking of a wall clock shaped like a house with no doors. A receptionist called my name, and moments later, I sat across from attorney Mara Landon, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked braids and reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She listened without interrupting, not even once, as I unfolded the decades of small signatures and invisible debts. When I finished, she leaned back and tapped a pen against her notebook. "You're not imagining the pattern," she said. "They treat your name as an asset because you've allowed them access. Not out of weakness," she added quickly, raising a hand. "Out of conditioning." The word stung because it felt true. "What do I do about these?" I asked, pushing the medical and financial proxy forms toward her. She skimmed them with the ease of someone who had seen every variation. "These can be powerful tools," she said, "or dangerous weapons. The difference is who's holding them." "I want to protect my father," I said, "but I don't trust my family with anything that touches my name." Her eyes softened. "Then we draft alternatives." What followed was a crash course in authority, boundaries, and legal structure, things my mother had always insisted I was too young or too anxious to understand. Mara explained how to appoint myself as a limited healthcare agent with clear restrictions, how to set financial authority to activate only with physician confirmation, how to insert clauses preventing household members from accessing any account tied to me. Then she slid a document template across the table. "This," she said, "is what you file at the courthouse if you want explicit legal separation of financial responsibility. It prevents anyone from opening accounts in your name, using your credit, or accessing your information without your signed consent. Do people actually need that? I asked. She gave me a look that said you already know the answer. We spent 2 hours tightening every clause, shaping every paragraph so my role was protected but functional. Mara typed quickly, decisively, as if stitching armor. When we finished, she said gently, "Your family will not like this. I know. They may accuse you of abandoning them." "I'm not," I said. "I'm preventing them from abandoning me again with the cost." She nodded, understanding settling in like dust on a quiet table. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "The documents will be ready to sign." When I left the building, the air outside felt sharper, clearer. My phone buzzed with messages from Mom. "Any update? We need those forms today. Please don't make this complicated, Lena." Then one from Ethan. "Dad asked if you're coming back tonight." The guilt landed hard, but it didn't bury me this time. I texted back, "Tell him I love him. I'll see him tomorrow." For the first time in years, I didn't rush to fix something before someone else asked. I drove home in silence, windows cracked slightly, letting the cool night air wash over the heat in my chest. The forms were still on my passenger seat. This time, they weren't a trap. They were leverage. And for the first time in my life, my name was becoming something my family could not reach for without my permission. I returned to the attorney's office the next morning, a faint drizzle tapping against the windshield as if urging me forward. Mara greeted me with a folder thicker than the one I'd brought her. She turned each page toward me, explaining each clause with meticulous calm. When she finished, she placed a pen beside the stack. "Once you sign these," she said, "you won't be powerless the next time your family decides your name belongs to them." The pages were heavy in my hands. Line after line defined where my authority began and ended, what I could protect, what I could refuse, and what they could never sign on my behalf again. As the ink dried beside my signature, something subtle shifted inside me. Not triumph. Not rebellion. Clarity. Mara made copies, stamped each page, then slid the originals into an envelope. "File these with the county clerk today," she instructed. "Once they're processed, the hospital will only recognize your documents, not anything they try to submit." It felt surreal, like I was quietly altering a blueprint I'd been born into. "That's it?" I asked. "That's the beginning," she corrected. "Now you have structure. Tomorrow, you use it." The hospital was a maze of white floors and too bright lighting, but this time I walked through it with the calm of someone carrying armor others couldn't see. When I pushed open the door to my father's room, Mom was already inside, arms crossed, irritation simmering low beneath her perfume. "You missed the morning consult," she said sharply. I was finalizing my documents. Her brows snapped together. "What documents?" "The ones that define my role clearly." Her confusion flashed into something more defensive. "We already told the hospital I'll handle all major decisions," she said. "We filled out the forms you didn't sign." "I know," I said gently. "They called me." For the first time, my mother's voice wavered. "What do you mean they called?" "They needed to verify whose authority they should accept," I said. "They'll be using mine." Her face drained of color. "Lena, you're being dramatic. I've always managed your father's affairs." "You've also managed mine," I said softly. "That ends today." Before she could respond, the attending physician walked in with a clipboard. He greeted my father, then turned to the rest of us. "We reviewed the legal paperwork," he said, glancing at me. "Moving forward, all medical decisions will require authorization from Miss Cole." My mother stepped forward. "That must be a mistake. I submitted forms this morning." The doctor didn't yield. "Her documentation is the only legally valid set." My father's tired eyes shifted between us. "Lena," he murmured. I stepped closer and took his hand, the same hand that had trembled when I arrived yesterday. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Mom bristled. "This isn't how our family functions." I turned to her fully. "Exactly," I said. "It's not." The doctor cleared his throat, excused himself, and left the three of us in a silence thick enough to touch. Mom stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. This version of me didn't shrink. Didn't apologize. Didn't sign because someone else said so. Dad squeezed my hand once, faintly. Approval or confusion, I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing. For the first time in my life, my name belonged entirely to me. And nothing terrified my family more. Dad's recovery was slow but steady. Over the next week, I visited daily, answering questions from nurses, signing small consents, reviewing treatment plans. Mom hovered in the background, visibly unsettled each time a staff member turned to me instead of her. Ethan tried to act neutral, but the tension clung to him like humidity. Molly barely made eye contact. They weren't used to a version of me who didn't bend. One evening, as I gathered my things to leave, Dad reached for my wrist. His grip was weak, bones sharp beneath skin that looked thinner than I remembered. "You're doing good," he said, voice raspy. "I'm trying," I whispered. His gaze drifted toward the door where Mom had just stepped out to make a call. "Your mother means well," he murmured. She's always tried." I swallowed the familiar burn in my throat. "Trying doesn't erase what happened." "No," he agreed, "but she doesn't understand what she takes. She never has." He looked at me then with a clarity that startled me. "But you do." It was not absolution, it was acknowledgement. And coming from him, it was more than I expected. When I left the hospital that night, a voicemail from Mom waited on my phone. "We need to talk. Privately, tomorrow morning." Her tone was clipped, brisk, like a woman preparing for war. I knew what was coming. The reckoning she'd been holding back in every icy silence. We met in the hospital cafe, the one with burnt coffee and stale pastries no one seemed to actually order. She sat already, back straight, fingers wrapped around a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. "You embarrassed me," she said without preamble. I exhaled slowly. "This isn't about embarrassment. You undermined me in front of the hospital staff," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "In front of your siblings, you made us look chaotic." "We are chaotic," I said quietly. "We just pretend we're not." Her eyes hardened. "Your father needed unity, not this power grab." "It isn't a power grab," I said. "It's protection, for him and for me." She leaned in, voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Your name would be nothing without this family." There it was, the truth she had always believed. The truth I had been conditioned to breathe like oxygen. Not anymore. "My name," I said slowly, evenly, "has survived everything this family has done to it, and now it will outgrow all of you." For a moment, she looked genuinely startled, like she'd expected resistance to crumble the moment she pressed harder. But the ground didn't shift beneath me this time. I stayed still. She drew back with a small exhale, composure sliding back into place like a mask. "Fine," she said coolly. "If you want to be in charge, be in charge. Don't come running to me when it overwhelms you." She stood, smoothing her blouse, and walked away before I could respond. I watched her go, her spine stiff, movements sharp. She had always believed control was love. That managing meant caring. That proximity meant ownership. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Because for the first time, I finally understood her. And understanding is its own kind of release. 2 months passed, steady as a metronome. Dad was discharged and entered outpatient therapy. I coordinated appointments, transportation, prescriptions. Ethan helped when I asked. Molly visited occasionally, though she kept her distance. Mom remained civil, beautifully polite, painfully performative. She behaved like a woman waiting for me to fail so she could reclaim the throne she'd never admitted she held. But something else shifted, subtly, quietly, beneath the surface. The trust documents my grandmother left began their final processing. A formal review meeting was scheduled, me, the attorneys, and my family. The day before the meeting, I received an email from the estate lawyer. "We've completed our audit. You may want to preview Section 4 before the meeting tomorrow." I opened the attached PDF. Section 4 was titled, Misappropriation Review, Unauthorized Financial Use. The list beneath it made my breath stop. Every credit line opened in my name. Every unauthorized signature. Every instance where my mother or father had used my information under the guise of family management. Every inconsistency. Every unexplained withdrawal. Each one labeled with the same phrase, liability, assigned to Patricia Cole, my mother, not me. My grandmother had known. She had tracked it, documented it, compiled evidence quietly while everyone assumed she was fading. My throat tightened around something too complex to name. Not vindication, not anger, recognition. Someone had seen me. Fully, clearly, quietly. The next morning, the conference room held a familiar cast. My mother bristling beneath a silk scarf, Ethan shifting uncomfortably, Molly twirling a ring on her finger, Dad sitting with a cane leaning against his chair. The attorney cleared his throat and opened the binder. We'll begin with the liability review, he said. Mom smiled lightly. Oh, that part isn't relevant to us. I handled all of Grandma's. Then the attorney began to read, line after line, entry after entry. Her smile faltered, then cracked, then collapsed into something raw and unfamiliar. What is this? She whispered. These are documented instances, the attorney said calmly, in which you used your daughter's identity to secure credit or financial accommodations without her knowledge. Your mother was aware of these occurrences and instructed us to assign financial responsibility accordingly. Mom's breath hitched, loud in the room. Dad's hand trembled on his cane. Ethan froze. Molly's lips parted in stunned silence. Mom shook her head violently. No, I did that to help the family. We all benefited. You can't possibly expect. I don't expect anything, I said quietly. But Grandma did. Her eyes snapped to mine, wide and glistening. How long have you known? Since yesterday, I said, but I lived through it long before I saw it. She swallowed hard, mascara smudging beneath her lower lashes. You could have warned me. I exhaled softly. I wasn't warned. Silence settled like dust. Then the attorney continued. This liability will be deducted from your inheritance share, Mrs. Cole. Your daughter's share remains untouched. My mother looked at me as if the ground beneath her had tilted. But I wasn't falling with her. For the first time, I wasn't falling at all. The meeting ended in fractured silence. My mother remained seated even after the others left, hands trembling, eyes red, shoulders caved inward as if the air itself had become too heavy. I didn't move. Not out of sympathy, not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Finally, she whispered, I didn't know it would come to this. I looked at her, really looked. Not as the woman who had shaped me or the force I'd spent my life surviving, but as a person confronted by the truth she'd never expected to be reflected back. You never thought there were consequences, I said gently, because I always carried them for you. Her chin trembled. I was trying to keep us afloat. I know, I said, but you built the raft out of me. For a moment, she crumbled, small, human, stripped of the practiced confidence she wrapped herself in like silk. Do you hate me? The question landed like a feather dipped in lead. No, I said, and it was the truth. But I won't hand you my future the way you took my past. Her eyes closed, as if those words struck deeper than anything else could. I stood, gathered my folder, slipped the documents inside. I'm not leaving the family, I said softly. I'm leaving the version of myself you relied on. When I reached the doorway, she whispered, Lena, what happens now? I glanced back. Now we learn who we are without me as the safety net. I walked out before she could answer. Life didn't transform overnight. Dad and I grew closer, slowly, quietly. Ethan apologized one evening outside the rehab center, awkward and earnest. Molly sent a long text days later, admitting she'd never realized how much weight had been laid on my shoulders. None of it erased the past, but it acknowledged it. And acknowledgement, I learned, is a kind of sunlight. I filed the last set of documents 2 weeks later, the formal declarations separating my credit, identity, and legal authority from my family's financial behavior. A notarized line drawn in ink. The clerk stamped it. Final, irrevocable, mine. That night I drove to a quiet overlook outside the city. The air was cool, the horizon washed in fading gold. I stepped out of the car and stood alone for a long moment, my breath visible in the dying light. For the first time, I wasn't running from something. I was walking toward something. A life where my name wasn't an obligation. A future where my signature meant choice, not sacrifice. A self built not from survival, but from sovereignty. As the sun disappeared below the line of trees, a soft certainty settled over me. My family might spend years trying to understand the boundary I'd drawn, but I didn't draw it for them. I drew it for the woman who had been signing blindly her whole life. The woman who finally learned her worth could not be borrowed, rewritten, or claimed. I looked at the horizon and whispered the truth that had taken 32 years to learn. My name is mine. And this time, the silence that followed was hope.